Chapter 2 is we're going to discuss the nature of crime and victimization. We're going to focus on the task of measuring crime. We're kind of going to take a more criminology approach. Let's start with some questions. I think we can agree that if there was no crime at all, there would be no need for a criminal justice system. But unfortunately, even if we step back in time, way back in time, Middle Ages time, crime existed. Clearly, it has evolved over time. But types of questions we got to consider is, where do most crimes occur? And what are the patterns of trends in the crime rate? That's what we're going to discuss. Because we need to have like a clear, accurate understanding of crime in order to create effective policies, in order to combat it or at least minimize it. The goal isn't to do away with it forever, because it's always existed. So we're going to learn how to obtain those accurate measures of crime, or at least attempt to look at the picture of crime and crime trends in how we get there, and maybe it will help better predict what society needs, such as increased patrol or less patrol, maybe rehabilitation services versus incarceration, and any other ways that can help us in the criminal justice system. So the objectives here for this chapter, we're going to answer the following, or discuss the following. What is a crime? How's it measured? How much crime is there? What are its trends and patterns? How about, why do people commit crimes? How many people become victims of crimes? Under what circumstances does victimization take place? So that's what we're going to talk about. And we'll start with a very general definition. How is crime defined? We'll keep it simple. A violation of law. We'll start with that until we go through the different views that criminologists use. And you have to think, why are some acts considered a violation of law and others are not? Because there's some types of behavior, we'll call it deviant behavior, that isn't criminal. So let's talk about the different views. Let's start with the most popular view. It's called the consensus view, and that's exactly what it kind of implies. There's an agreement among citizens on what should and shouldn't be illegal. It implies that all groups are together on determining what should be illegal, regardless of race, social class, age, and gender, etc. It also suggests that the law is a function of beliefs, moral beliefs and rules that apply equally to all members of society. So that's the consensus view. Think agreement. Everybody agrees, consensus view. We can all agree that killing your newborn child upon birth is murder. Right? We can all agree to that one. And these laws, some laws have developed over time, and they have been decriminalized. And there was things that were not a crime that now are a crime. In my lifetime, the seatbelt laws. You guys have been, most of you have probably been alive and had to wear a seatbelt in the car, or had to sit in a car seat in the back seat. None of that existed when I was a kid. I could ride up front. I could sit in my dad's lap while he drove the car when I was a kid. And I was already driving and had a license before it became a law to wear a seatbelt. The DWI laws, those weren't around way back when. They have evolved over time due to, society's needs. And there's tons of old laws on the books, and maybe for fun we'll take a look at some of those, like the ones that pop into my head. I read recently for another case. We were looking at old laws in Massachusetts. It's not an old law; it's actually still on the books. it's kind of adhered to. It's maybe a respect thing, but it is illegal to rearrange the national anthem. You have to sing the national anthem as it was written. You can't set it to dance music. You can't remix it. And that's a law in Massachusetts. There's a law in the books in New York State that on Sundays you can't put ice cream in your pocket. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about another view. Let's talk about the other end of the spectrum here, the conflict view. And this sees society as a collection of diverse groups. It kind of stems from Karl Marx's view that he developed, that basically a capitalist society creates these conflict groups, these diverse groups that are in conflict with each other. So it's that the creation of laws is unequal and may not have a consensus. It's controlled by the rich and powerful who control and shape the content to ensure that they remain in control. So these groups are constantly in conflict with each other. For example, let's take a person who's in a bar brawl. Okay, they get into a fight. Are they any greater threat to society than a CEO who refuses to cut his profits to make his plant any safer at work, where somebody can get injured or killed? Should these two be separated? And these are the types of crimes we're dealing with. A street brawl or a bar brawl is going to be considered a street crime or an assault type case, while a cutting profits is going to be some violation of some employment type restriction or some law that requires businesses to have certain safety measures in place. That's usually punished by a large fine and slap on the wrist, versus an assault, depending how bad somebody's hurt, and go to prison over. That's what this conflict view is about. The interactionist view. And this is where the crime reflects, the view is that crime reflects the preferences and opinions of people who hold social power in a particular industry. And for example, the automotive industry or the pharmaceutical industry. And they use their influence to shape the legal process. This also works in the entertainment industry to shape laws their way. Related to criminal laws, I threw in the entertainment law in there because Disney has a way of influencing how some civil type rules should run relative to the protection of like their copyright and so forth. But let's talk about criminal law here. So these folks become like what they call them a quote unquote moral entrepreneur. Those who want others to follow their moral stance. They want to create rules and argue that their causes are better. Their causes will better the society, and and usually it's driven by a vested interest. Okay, the pharmaceutical company hates the idea of having marijuana be legal because of all of the research that states how great marijuana is for helping, let's say, pain, for instance. Pharmaceuticals don't like that idea. So, drugs are bad. Marijuana's bad. They're big money makers, right? And get behind that. An old example is jaywalking. There's a video posted on Moodle. It's kind of cute about jaywalking. But how jaywalking became a law, and basically jaywalking is being in the street in a not designated walkway or lane where you're supposed to be as a pedestrian. That was pushed by the auto industry. They used aggressive tactics to get support that laws would be the cause, or accidents involving motor vehicles that were just starting to come on the scene, and to keep people out of the street and getting hit. So they were blaming those accidents on pedestrians for being in the middle of the street and not the vehicles. And they had an aggressive campaign, especially at schools, and wanted to keep the kids out of the streets. So there's a video on jaywalking if you're interested in how it's changed. All right, so these three different views of crime, they're out there, and they slightly are different from each other, but they do agree on 4 points. That criminal law defines crime. Criminal law defines crime. Definition of a crime is constantly changing. And social forces mold the definition of crimes. And criminal law is a social control function. So we're going to keep those things in mind when we're defining crime. That's what comes from these 3 views. And if you want a reference in the book, page 31. So what is crime? If we put these things together, it's a violation of social rules of conduct expressed in a written code. And I'm putting in parentheses statutes in a written code. We call them statutes. Created by people holding social and political power. Contents may be influenced by prevailing public opinions, sentiments, moral beliefs, and a need to protect society. So that's a big definition of crime. And the catch-all on all this is those who violate these rules or these codes, statutes, they're subject to sanctions, which are also set by the code, by the way. So how do we measure crime? It is difficult to determine the amount of crime that occurs in our communities every year because many crimes never come to the attention of the criminal justice system. Here we go. Do we have a percentage here? I don't think we have a percentage here. I was looking for one. Why? Why would many crimes not come to the attention of the criminal justice system? Victims aren't reporting. Victims don't realize they're victims. Offenders don't get caught. Sometimes they don't get caught, and this causes underreporting of crime, and they got a name for it. It's called dark figure. Dark figure. Why might someone not report a crime? Because a lot of some people who don't report crimes, they think it's their fault. If you live in rural New York, you might be of the mindset that you leave other people's stuff alone. We're all on the buddy system here. We're all good. You leave our stuff alone, and we leave our houses and our cars unlocked. Then you move to a bigger, more urban area, and you have your upstate New York, rural New York mindset, and you leave your car unlocked with the keys in it, and it gets taken. And rather than call the cops, you just kind of go looking for it, and you find it several blocks away. And your response might be, oh, they just went for a joyride. I was stupid to leave the car unlocked with the keys in it. And you don't report it. That happens. Some people just blame themselves. It was my own damn fault. All right. Domestic violence, also another reason crimes don't get reported. People lack trust in the police. In the domestic violence area, people don't want to get the other person in trouble. Some victims might have quote unquote dirty hands, like they stole money from a drug dealer, right? So they might be involved in some way. So there's 3 general sources of crime statistics. There's official statistics, there's self-reporting statistics, and there's victimization statistics, and each has their own pros and cons, and we are going to review those. And the key, the hope is if you have accurate and reliable crime statistics and data, then that can help better evaluate the criminal justice policies and programs. For instance, you can use that information that's collected to see if incarcerating drug offenders is effective. Yes, they have programs inside correctional facilities, but would it be better to put somebody, in the community in a treatment facility? So these are that's an example. These are the types of things that we use the data for. So what kinds of official statistics? I'll get to the one that's been sitting on the screen while I've been kind of giving you some background information. The FBI's Uniform Crime Reports. And all of these statistic databases are on the internet, and I have linked them onto Moodle. So one of your assignments is going to be to check them out and to do a little research. So despite the fact that crime does go unreported, we still have to kind of use what we got and estimate and attempt to measure crime. So it's gathered from various criminal justice agencies, such as the police and the courts, and it represents the total number of crimes reported to the police or the number of arrests made by an agency. Now, I'm just going to stop and make a side note. If an officer uses discretion and say doesn't make an arrest, then it's not reported. Okay? So, got to keep that in mind too. So the FBI's UCR, let's call it, is the largest, most common database that's on crime that's available, and it also is considered a highly reliable indicator of crime patterns and trends. The objective with this reporting system is to generate reliable info for use in law enforcement, administration, operation, and management. It has everything to do with the court system. It's use in law enforcement, administration, operation, and management. And there's 4 databases within the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports: the National Incident-Based Reporting System, the Summary Reporting System, Law Enforcement Officers Killed and Assaulted Program, and Hate Crime Statistics. The National Incident-Based Reporting System was created to improve the overall quality of the crime data collected by law enforcement. The system is unique because it collects data on crimes reported to the police and incidences where multiple crimes are committed. For instance, if like there was a robbery, but then it escalated to a rape or a murder. It also collects information on victims, known offenders, relationships between victims and offenders, arrestees, which we put in a different category as offenders, people who've, there's who's been arrested, not name-wise, but the number of people who've been arrested, but maybe they don't end up with a conviction. And what kind of property was involved in a crime. And this database is slated to replace the FBI's UCR in January 2021, so in a few months. So these statistics are great. But here's a question. Can't police agencies change their attention to certain types of events and crimes, which then ultimately change the overall number of arrests? If you look at a database and you're like, wow, that city of Plattsburgh made a lot of arrests for welfare fraud, or a lot of arrests in, 2017 for illegal gun possession. Holy cow, what's going up there? They got lots of guns up there. Well, there are times when a law enforcement group, and those are 2 examples that did happen here in Plattsburgh, is sometimes the agency will focus in on one particular type of crime. And when the SAFE Act was passed, there was grant money that was awarded across the state, and it was a crackdown on illegal who wasn't, complying with the SAFE Act rules. So there was a crackdown on gun possession in response to people falsely reporting for welfare benefits. A grant was given, and the investigation for welfare fraud went up, and there was more arrests for welfare fraud. So it may look like it's like appearing to be, the problem increased, when not really. It's just more of a crackdown or a more focused view. But that comes out in the statistics. But again, if the crime's not reported or there's no arrests, then there's no data to capture. All right, victimization studies. This is an attempt to fill in where police reports are missing. And what do? They ask people if they've ever been a victim of a crime in a given year. whether it's reported or not reported, meaning to the police, reported or not reported. So we have the National Crime Victimization Survey. That's the primary source of information on criminal victimization in the U.S. This helps fill in the gaps that the UCR and the NIBRS, because the data is only crimes that's known to the police. That's what those two are. So this kind of supplements that. The U.S. Census Bureau is the one that administers this survey and gathers the data on frequency, characteristics, and consequences of criminal victimization from approximately 200,000 people. And that sounds like a very large number when you think about the number of people in the United States, though. That's not that big a number. So info is on non-fatal personal crimes. So that's what, murder's out. Well, for obvious reasons, murder's out because you can't interview your victim. So sexual assault, robbery, assault, and larceny are the personal crimes that are reviewed or that they seek information on, and household property crimes, burglary, motor vehicle theft, and other types of petty theft crimes. And it could be reported or not reported. So it collects information on age, sex, race, ethnicity, marital status, education level, and income, whether experienced victimization or not. It also collects offenders' information, like the time, place, occurrence, weapon, if there's a weapon used, the nature of the injury, if there was an injury, like such, not just a physical injury, but an economic loss, if it was a theft. So the data is considered unbiased, and it's a valid estimate. However, if you think about it, there could be some problems, challenges, limitations in this type of data. Can it lead to under or over reporting, like the recall of the victimization when somebody's a victim of a crime, like how clear is their memory? Were they traumatized? That can lead to an incident being like, oh, it's just a big blur. Let me try and figure it out. What about lying or omitting information? Maybe because of shame, guilt, lack of trust, fear. They might lie about it or omit information. They might be uncomfortable with the person doing the interview because these things are done one-on-one. Like I alluded to before, responding group might not represent the nation as a whole. That's 200,000 people is a small number. Faulty format questions, and fear of reporting. So they don't want to report. Self-reporting statistics and surveys. These are stats that are actually reported by the individuals. The self-reporting gets gathered when people are asked to report the number of times that they have committed this. So these self-reporting surveys are geared towards whether or not somebody participated or committed a crime during a set period in the past, regardless of getting caught or not. And the assumption is people will be candid because it is administered anonymously. The point is to measure crimes that would neither be reported to the police nor show up in any victim surveys. And a good example of this is using illegal substances. The point of this is to reach those dark figures. And these surveys are mostly administered in school because attendance is universal and represents across sections of communities. However, it's not restricted to schools, but most of the time they are. And they're usually conducted annually. How valid are they? Are there any limitations? Well, you can have exaggeration again, or you can have an underreport of criminal behavior. If we're dealing with students being asked these questions, they may not know something was a crime, So that might be hard. You may not get a large enough sample, or you only might focus on drugs versus suspension or some other area and not quite get an accurate result. And some may not cooperate at all. So there is this self-reporting survey. There's pros and cons to each of these sources, and the question is, can these statistics be misused? Sure. Happens all the time, intentionally and accidentally. You know, the misuse of statistics promotes crime myths and generates fear of crime. Let's talk about some ways that it can be misused. Limiting public access to the critical information. I think that's why we have all of these databases that are out there, and when you go to them for this week's assignment, you will see that they are there's a lot of information that you can find on these. Could be intending to mislead the public by presenting false information. This is how this data can be used. Using deceptive formats to present the information. Did you ever see charts and graphs? And they can kind of the numbers can get a little manipulated. Who would be an example of someone that would use or misuse this information? Politicians? How about the media? Government officials? How about organizations that may want to persuade an issue one way or another? Like the pharmaceutical company trying to get all the information relative to the drug arrests to show that drugs are a problem. Maybe to be able to tie it in with the marijuana is bad for the community and people, and it should remain illegal. So anyway, check out the pros and cons in the book. I have some up here on the screen, and we are going to move on. The next lecture will be crime trends.